This is the Fantasy Roadshow.
Hey, welcome back, everybody, for another episode of the Fantasy Roadshow. This episode is brought to you by Rule One Proteins. If you are looking to get back into the game or just up your supplement game, they have the best proteins, the best supplements, the best vitamins, you name it, they've got it. Just visit www.rule1proteins.com. Thanks for joining us. Please take a second, if you haven't already, to like and hit the subscribe button. I am joined by Coles, as always. And today we have a very special guest, as we are joined by Matt O'Leary, the host of Just Jet podcast. Matt, how are we doing?
I'm doing good, guys. Thank you so much for having me on to talk some New York Jets football today.
Hey, awesome. Thanks for joining. Yeah, we mentioned before we started, we have a third co-host, Fantasy Trucker. He typically does our intros, and he's kind of the production side of things. So that's why the intro music ran twice, and we had off to a little, we're workshopping as we go. So appreciate you having coming on, and we're gonna get into Jets. Talk everything off season storylines, as well as kind of get into your background, what you're working on and where you got to, host the podcast and kind of things you're working on. So, yeah, thanks for joining, and let's get into it. I guess where you're from and where your Jets fandom came from, and how you kind of got in the podcast space.
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up on Long Island in New York, not too far from where the Jets used to practice. They used to practice up until 2008 at Hofstra University, which is about 10 minutes from where I grew up. So many summers were spent going and watching practices from a young age, and those are some of my best and earliest Jets memories, are going and watching the early 2000s Jets practices over at Hofstra. My dad's a big Jets fan, and he's, kind of passed it on to me. And really from there, I was just drawn to this team. That I wear my heart on my sleeves with my team. I'm very passionate about it. And how I got into the podcast space, I went to college for broadcasting. I worked in radio for a little bit. And I decided about 5 years ago to make a YouTube channel, just because it was a hobby of mine. I like talking about, sports, and it originally started as a all New York sports channel, kind of like a, New York sports talk show. And I noticed the Jets videos were doing better. And I was like, oh, okay, maybe there's something here. So I pivoted and just started doing Jets videos, and then later the Just Jets podcast. And it's grown from there, and it's been a big part of my life. I talk about this team every single day. It's been a long journey over the last 5 or so years, but I have a lot of fun doing what I do every day.
Awesome. Yeah. So, we are a fantasy podcast, and as we discussed, we've been trying to get the voice of a fan base and talk off-season storylines. So super excited to get into the Jets with you. But first wanted to just see kind of what your involvement in the fantasy space is, if you have a couple home leagues, and just, what your involvement is there.
Yeah, so I do play fantasy football. I would consider myself more of a casual player. Like, I'm not in any crazy leagues. It's like $50 or $100 entry for both the leagues I'm in. But I will say I did win both of my leagues this year, so I guess I'm doing something right there. I will take it. It was my first championship in both of those leagues, so I was happy to get the dub. It wasn't like a full dominant run, kind of just got hot at the right time at the end of the year, and that's really all that matters. So I'll take it. And I won both championships on the same day that I got engaged to my fiance. So 3 rings in one day is the joke that I've been saying ever since. So yeah, it was a good final day of fantasy football, and great way to close out 2023.
I love it. That's a great story. I appreciate sharing with us. Yeah. So did you have any guys in the draft that you were targeting that were on both teams that blew up late, or were they different roster builds and it just so happened you came home champ?
Yeah, kind of different roster builds. I had T Higgins on both teams, and
Oh,
a
yeah.
injury early in the year that hurt me for a while, but he came back and was better down the stretch for me. I had McCaffrey on one of the teams. I just wrote him. He was my best player. Obviously, he was fantastic for me. The other one, it really just felt like dumb luck. There were some injuries, some waiver wire claims, and the next thing you know, you're kind of just, like I said, you get hot at the right time. You get a good favorable matchup. Someone just goes off one week, and you find yourself in the championship, and then you end up winning.
Love it. Outstanding. Well, let's talk Jets. I mean, there's definitely a lot here to talk about. I think last season, like, everyone could agree that there's a championship defense there, playing at an extremely high level. The injury to Rodgers was tragic. You don't have to be a Jets fan to feel that one. That was just, sports fans are not happy about, one of the best quarterbacks going down on literally one of the first snaps. But there's quite a few offseason storylines here to talk about. First, I guess, just like a general overview from your perspective of the local fan base. Are we optimistic heading into the year? Just kind of where the fan base is currently looking and focused on for this next season.
Yeah, I would say most are pretty optimistic. You have a section of fans that are worried, and a lot of it is just because of past history, and they'll say like, well, there's just something's going to go wrong, kind of just waiting for that other shoe to drop, which, I get it. It's frustrating. It's hard to be a Jets fan, but with what they've done this offseason, I think it's hard not to be excited about it. You mentioned at the top how good the defense was last year. They're bringing back essentially the same unit. They add Hassan Reddick and obviously lose Bryce Huff, but that's a comparable swap there at edge rusher. They get Chuck Clark back, who was hurt last year. So I expect like the defense is going to be good, but they just dealt with horrific quarterback play last year after Aaron Rodgers goes down. So I think the jump from going from Zach Wilson, Tim Boyle, and Trevor Siemian starting games from you up to Aaron Rodgers, even if he's not MVP level Rodgers from 2020 or 2021, is going to be a massive upgrade for this team. And I think the division in the AFC East is a winnable division. You have three teams in the Jets, Dolphins, and Bills. Obviously, Bills just lost Stephon Diggs, but I think all three of those teams are going to be competitive and beat up on each other. So I think a lot of Jet fans think that, they have a shot to end this playoff drought, which is the longest in all four major North American sports. So it's about time.
Yeah. Well, that's going to be an exciting time for your podcast, because I agree. I'm high on the Jets. I was like, I'd say going into last season, this was the year that I was going to be more excited for the Jets. I feel like that first year when all the hype kind of builds around it, it's difficult to live up to that hype, like Brady going to the Bucks, for example. Like I did not think he was going to win that first year. That was an incredible job by him, but I guess Russell going to the Broncos, like there was so much hype around that, and it just didn't quite live up to expectations. I feel like when you bring in a whole new quarterback and team, there needs to be that time for the chemistry to build. Now you have Breece Hall, who's an insane talent. You have Garrett Wilson, who's an insane talent. So I think that curve gets expedited a little bit. Obviously, Rodgers helps with that as well. But this was the year I was really excited for. Obviously, they didn't get the entire year of playing experience to build that chemistry. But defense is. If you could have taken one thing from last year, is that defense had you in a position, not playoffs, but like not too far off from playoffs with that horrible quarterback play. So having that confidence and knowing that that's what you have to lean on, Rodgers, from his talent and his experience alone, should be able to put you in a position with those weapons we just talked about, right? So let's talk about who they added. Mike Williams. What's your thought process there? Adding that weapon, I guess he'd probably play that Lazard role, but let's hear what you have with Mike Williams.
Yeah, so I'm excited about the Mike Williams edition. Obviously, only 3 games last year, tears the ACL. So there's a little bit of concern with how he's going to, come back and respond at, 29, 30 years old off an injury like that. But I think he complements Garrett Wilson really well because they're very, stylistically very different. So Garrett's someone you want to get the ball in space to. He could do a lot of damage yards after the catch over the middle of the field. He's not really a crazy, big deep threat, but Mike Williams has been someone who's won on 9 routes a lot in his career. He's a good red zone target with his size. He can go up and high point the football. Last year, because the injury wasn't great, but the year prior, he was towards the top of the league in contested catches. So for a red zone offense that struggled so much last year, and again, a lot of it was because of the quarterback play, but also just giving yourself another option in the red zone and someone who could go up and high point the football in Mike Williams, I think is going to be a really nice piece to this offense. They're not done at wide receiver. I think they still need to add more through the NFL draft and, maybe supplemental free agency and just some depth pieces. But I really like the addition of Mike Williams. Assuming health, I think he should have a nice bounce back year in his first year with the Jets.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you also, Matt, a little bit like the investment they made this offseason in the offensive line. They brought in, obviously signed Tyron Smith, who I'm familiar with, obviously as a big Cowboys fan, and his work and everything. And then John Simpson and Morgan Moses with the draft pick trade swap. How did you feel about those additions this offseason for that offensive line?
Yeah, I was really happy about it because it was something that was another big weakness. The 2 biggest things with this Jets offense was the quarterback play and the offensive line. Last year, injuries absolutely decimated the line. They played 13 different offensive linemen, of course, across the season, and had it felt like different line combinations every single week with guys missing time. But the Morgan Moses trade, I thought, was a really nice move. You don't really give up a lot. You slide back in the 4th round and you give up a late 6th round pick for a guy who's, in my opinion, a starter at right tackle. I think he's a solid, steady guy there. In Tyron Smith, the thing with him is when he's on the field and healthy, he's still one of the best offensive tackles in the league. Even at his age, I think, obviously because the injury history, you have to have a good backup plan in case he does miss time. Yeah, I think that his last full season was 2015, so that's a long time ago now. So he's going to get banged up at some point, but he's just so good when he's on the field. And for John Simpson, this was kind of his first real shot with Baltimore last year starting, and there were some up and downs. Penalties were a big problem for him last year, but after watching some of the tape from him, obviously he's not really like a bigger name guy, but you learn a little bit more about him. I like the energy that he plays with. He's dominant in the run game. He can get a little over his skis sometimes as a pass protector, and that's where some of the holdings and just the aggressiveness comes in and on the negative side. But, if he's your weaker link on the offensive line, like your 5th best starter, I think that's solid. But you go into the draft, you have a pick in the 1st round. Maybe you take another offensive lineman and you kind of just load up from there. So I'm excited with how this line looks. It's a major upgrade on paper, but they still need to add some more depth to the unit as well.
Yeah, and I think last year the Cowboys, they figured out a good plan with Tyron Smith, and I will assume probably the Jets will mirror that. Is towards the second half of the year, I mean, he was not a practice guy all week. They just did not practice him all week, and it kind of helped him stay healthy at the end of the year. I think he only missed up like 3 games last year. So I'm sure they probably will look at that and do a similar type plan. If they get all but 3 games from him, that's a win for that line this year.
Yeah, definitely agree with you there. I think they have to copy what the Cowboys did with that program. It makes sense. And like you said, if he plays even 13, 14 games, I think that's more than enough. And because he's still a dominant player at left tackle.
Yeah, I'm excited to see. I mean, you're going to know exactly what the exact comment was more than me, but I remember Breece Hall at some point during the year that was alluding to the offensive line. Like, maybe it was when Zach Wilson was having a little bit of troubles and he's like, listen, he has no time back there. Like, or he was referencing, I don't know exactly what he was referencing, but I remember at one point Breece Hall was vocal about like, we need to figure out this line, or otherwise it doesn't matter who's back there.
Yeah, it was, you paraphrase, that's essentially what he was saying, but it just got so bad. And, during the middle parts of the season, he struggled on the ground. He was still great, catching the football out of the backfield, but there was a stretch where, his yards per carry were way down, and then he kind of exploded the last few weeks of the year. But like I said, 13 different offensive linemen is just absolutely insane for an offensive line. And, that's Jet fans are, even though like the starting five on paper is great, Jet fans still want some more depth at it, because we've seen specifically the last 2 years, they've had a ton of injuries on the line. So hopefully these guys stay healthy. And I think that would be a huge upgrade for Breece, Rodgers, and the rest of the offense.
Yeah, what you mentioned earlier, like quarterback play and offensive line, and that's exactly what Joe Douglas is the GM, right?
Yep.
Yeah, it's exactly what Joe Douglas went out and did. So I sitting in your shoes, I'd be very happy with the offseason so far, right? You still got to go in and get the right draft pieces, but where we're currently sitting heading into next season, I think it's the right spot, right? But shifting focus a little bit, let's talk fantasy now. So you have the upgrade at quarterback, obviously. You have Garrett Wilson, bring in Mike Williams, Breece Hall. Yeah. To me, like Breece Hall is going to be probably RB1 off the board. Obviously you have McCaffrey, and that's going to be the industry consensus go-to, but like Breece Hall has been waiting for an offense that is going to be producing at a high level. And he clearly has a skill set that, like, when he's given the ball, it's highly productive. So, like, I just think I like to go away from industry consensus a little bit and think of a guy that's going to be high volume on a high scoring offense. And I just feel like he's been waiting for his time to shine. So, kind of with the momentum of the team, he could be someone that just breaks out and kind of takes over from a fantasy perspective. What do you think? With Breece, is there going to be someone that kind of is a change of pace back, or is it going to be Breece getting a full load, especially late in the season? What are your thoughts kind of on his?
Yeah, I really think it's going to be a heavy dosage of Breece Hall. Right now, they still kind of need a running back too on the roster. They have Izzy Abanikanda, who was a late round rookie last year, I believe a 4th round pick out of Pitt. He didn't really get a lot of usage. They had Michael Carter in front of him, who they ended up trading or releasing, and the Cardinals signed him. And then they had Dalvin Cook, which did not work out in the slightest. But with Breece Hall, man, like I know is ambitious, but I think he could be a 2,000 plus yard all purpose yard kind of guy. He's very, very involved in the passing attack. I think Rodgers likes to, dump it off to the backs. We saw success with that with Aaron Jones in Green Bay. And if healthy, like, I don't know, to me, there's no reason he can't be like 1,400 rushing yards, at another 500 to 700 receiving yards on top of that, and double-digit touchdowns. He was just such a force when, again, they had no offensive line last year, the worst quarterback room in the NFL last year, and he still found ways to produce. So with an improved offensive line, a massive improvement at quarterback, I think he's in for a massive third year in the NFL.
Yeah, I completely agree. I've always been very high on Breece Hall. And then just it's a little too early to start talking ADPs and where people are going to be drafted, but like just how I know who I typically look at. And like Saquon's another guy that just from a talent standpoint, like I'm always looking to see where they're drafted, because I'm typically higher than them, than industry consensus in rankings. And Breece Hall's a guy that I got in like a 5th round as a keeper, and I just know he's going to be going in the top. I don't know. Shane typically knows like rankings better than me, but I imagine Breece Hall's a 1st rounder next year.
Oh yeah, I think he's a top, probably top 5, top 7 pick even. I was surprised last year. What surprised me about him, I was a little down on him last year in fantasy. I just did not expect to see that explosiveness back so soon. that he showed and be able to handle that workload so soon. That's what surprised me, that he was able to come back and handle that workload so soon.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really great point, especially too. Like I was surprised by it because they added Dalvin Cook, and I thought that early on in the year they'd probably want to split carries, and they kind of did the first couple weeks of the year, but Dalvin was so ineffective they ended up just kind of putting him on the shelf and really starting to ride Breece, but he handled it well. He's right around 1,000 yards. He probably should have went over 1,000 yards on the season, but this year, another year removed from the injury. That was another big question too. How is he going to be responding off the ACL?
Yeah.
I don't think anything's holding him back at this point.
Yeah. That's why I was on him last year, is because I knew his value, baked into his value, was that concern. And sometimes you just see these freak athletes, which I consider him to be, not having, to being able to find that boost and that juice pretty quickly. And then, as we got into camp, that's what we were hearing like on the daily about Breece Hall. And then there was like a video or two released where he just like busted through the line and looked incredible. Granted, it's training camp, but like you just want to see that athleticism and that burst, right? In the game is a whole different story, but that gave me the confidence I needed, and I was drafting them all of last season. But moving to the pass catchers, I mean, Garrett Wilson is just dying for someone that get him the ball. He is such a talent. I am excited to draft him as well. Top 5. What are your what did you see from him? What is the fan base thinking in terms of, I imagine it's going to be Garrett 1, Williams 2. I don't know what the plan at tight end is. Kind of give us the breakdown of what you think top options are there in the receiving core.
Yeah, absolutely. Like Garrett's another one who just feels like primed to take another massive leap. Like in his rookie season, having 1,100 yards with Zach Wilson, Joe Flacco, and Mike White throwing him the football is just absurd. And then this year, again, same thing, puts up 1,000 yards with Zach Wilson, Tim Boyle, and Trevor Siemian and throwing him the football. He's just someone where, like, and there were times too on tape, you look like he's open and quarterbacks just could not find him last year. So Aaron Rodgers, obviously they didn't play a ton together, 4 snaps in the regular season, but on the one drive they had in preseason against the Giants, they go right down the field, and who catches the touchdown pass? It's Garrett Wilson in the end zone. They had fantastic chemistry already in training camp. Like I was lucky enough to go to a few training camp practices last year. And it was obvious that they had a strong connection early on. So I think he's going to put up, big wide receiver 1 numbers. And he's going to be the lead pass catcher there. Mike Williams, I would say, is number 2. They still need to, I think, either in the draft at either tight end, like Brock Bowers is a name that gets brought up a ton to the Jets. But even if they move back and take a wide receiver, or maybe they get a little creative in the draft and add a receiver in one of the, their first 2 picks, they're going to be involved. But also, like, I feel like I'm relatively high on Tyler Conklin. He wasn't very productive last year in the receiving touchdowns department. He had 0 receiving touchdowns, which is wild, but he had over 600 receiving yards. And I'm not saying he's going to be an elite level tight end in that like top tier, but with a guy like Rodgers, if he ends up sticking as tight end 1, could he be someone who gives you around 800 yards and maybe like 6 or 7 touchdowns? I wouldn't be surprised if he took his game to that level, because he's another one who kind of just feels like he's better than what his production has shown the last 2 years because of the quarterback play.
Yeah, Conklin. So I agree with you. I've always been a little bit higher on Conklin, just from like he's not viewed as a pass catching tight end, but he's sneaky good. And Rodgers is just the type of quarterback that gets so much out of a guy like that. We've seen it. We've seen it in the past at the Packers. Even who am I thinking of right now? Anyways, I wish I was a little more prepared to have just some of those like secondary tight end numbers from Rodgers at the Packers, but he'll make a guy with that exact skill set look really good, right? And you mentioned 600 last year. Rodgers likes to get his tight end involved. I could see that as well. Not only being a really good best ball pick, which is just, I don't know if you're familiar with best ball, but you draft an entire roster of players and then the optimized lineup gets set. So there could be a game where he's, a touchdown dependent type tight end, has 5 catches, 75, 80 yards on a touchdown, and he's, a top 5 tight end for the week.
Gotcha. Yeah, I could see that. And like I said, am I saying he's a top 10 tight end in the league? No, I don't think I'm going that far, but I think he could be an average to slightly above average starter for you if that's the route they go. Like Bowers is a name that gets brought up to the Jets and mocked to the Jets a lot right now, so we'll see if that's the route they go, but I wouldn't sleep on Tyler Conklin. I think he has a chance to be relatively productive in this offense too.
Well, one of the things, Matt, I wanted to ask you about before we get off of the offseason questions, I think this year there's a little bit better backup quarterback option in case, something does happen with Rodgers. We saw Tyrod Taylor have some good games last year with the Giants. So I just want to get your opinion on a couple of things. One, what the thoughts was on bringing him in, and two, also, what do we think was or has not been offered for Zach Wilson? Do you think there was actual teams that have offered draft pick compensation and were turned down because they didn't think it was high enough compensation, or do you think there hasn't been actual calls on Wilson?
So first, starting with Tyrod Taylor, I've kind of always liked his game. I saw a lot of him in Buffalo playing against the Jets earlier in his career, and I think he fits the game manager description well. Like he plays that role to a T. He still has a pretty big arm. He could push the ball down the field. He's mobile with his legs. Sometimes that gets him in trouble. Injury history, it gets banged up. So that's a slight concern for me. But I think he was, at least I would consider him a higher end backup, which is something I think they needed to do. They needed to come away this offseason with an improved plan behind Aaron Rodgers. I think they nailed that. And for Zach Wilson, I don't think there's been many offers, because I think if they were offered anything, they would have taken it. I mean, you saw guys around the league like Mac Jones doesn't go for a whole lot. Justin Fields doesn't get traded for a whole lot. I don't know what teams are offering, if anything, right now for Zach Wilson. So I think even if they got a late day 3 pick swap kind of trade, I think they would have to pull the trigger on it. It's because it's even valuable just to free up the $5 million or so in cap space that you'd get from moving on from Zach Wilson. I don't see him on this roster in 2024. I think if it came down to it, they might just end up releasing him. And maybe adding a mid-round quarterback this year to kind of sit and groom behind Tyrod Taylor and Aaron Rodgers and serve as that QB3.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking that as I was thinking through like Jets backup quarterback, this would be a great time to draft one of those middle round guys and just see what happens behind Rodgers, right? Like a guy who's just a sponge and can come in and really optimize their potential learning under Rodgers. You saw him like take in Zach Wilson, which I don't know that everyone would agree that like, is Rodgers going to be the type of quarterback who's just going to like put that type of effort into being a mentor for a younger quarterback? And, I think Hard Knocks showed it extremely well that that's just kind of the guy he is. He wants the quarterback room to be successful together. So it makes way too much sense bringing a new guy, a kind of a fresh, what is Pratt? Shane, is Pratt in that middle round?
Yeah, so I think Pratt from Tulane, you're probably looking anywhere from that 3rd, 4th, maybe 5th even.
Yeah, so that's a perfect example of a guy who like he's just gonna he would put his head down, learn everything he could from Rodgers, and who knows, that could be the next option. You know what I mean? You know what I mean there. So is there any other names being kicked around? I'm just kind of going off the cuff there, bringing up Pratt's name. So
yeah, Michael Pratt's one that I like a lot. He's one of my favorite like mid-round options. The other names like Jordan Travis out of Florida State with the injury. That's another one that's a popular name amongst Jet fans. Maybe take a flyer on him. And then Spencer Rattler, depending on where he ends up going. Michael, for whatever reason, I kind of like Michael Pratt the best of that group. I don't know, just something draws me to his game a little bit, but with those late day 2, early day 3 guys, it's so hard to hit on quarterback in general, even in the first round. But in the mid rounds, you kind of just gotta, you latch onto a trait that you like and you hope that it works out at the next level. But I think that one of those 3 types of quarterbacks right there, draft them in roughly the 4th round, sit them for a year or 2. Maybe they just end up turning into a backup quarterback for you for the future, which is fine, but you never know. Maybe you find your Dak Prescott, right? Like he's a 4th round pick, or, Brock Purdy, last pick of the draft. That's one that, everyone's talked about in recent years. So you never know with these guys.
Yeah. So for me, like, I love Rattler. I think from a skill set, he's got it. It's just like his maturity, and if he's grown, like, so that's not something that we're going to know, right? You have to be in a room with him, going through an interview, and just see if his maturity, if he's ready to be a professional. Because you put Rodgers in a room with that guy and just say, hey, this is how you be a pro, put in the work. And if he's willing to put in the work, the skill set's there. The ability to read defenses is there. Like he's shown that he's could be a very good quarterback and work within a system. Right. And that's kind of what Rodgers is he has his system hammered out to where, if that's something that Rattler can learn and absorb, that could be a home run. Now, there's someone like Pratt who has a pretty high potential, but is going to put in the work, and he's kind of already seen him optimize his potential. That's probably a little bit more of a stable route, right? So I don't know. The Jets are there. They're in the interview room and going through the process. We're not, so they're, I'm sure going to make a right decision. Joe Douglas has been doing an outstanding job, but yeah, that's definitely something that I would think this is the year to do. So it's good to keep that on the radar. What else from the draft are you looking? We've talked pass catcher, we've talked wide receiver potentially, and now this mid-round quarterback. What else are you looking to do in the draft here?
Yeah, so I think the 2 most important positions they need to attack early is offensive line and wide receiver, which we hit on a lot. Quarterback in the mid rounds is something I'd like to see, but they kind of just need to round out some depth at other positions. On the interior defensive line, they could use another body. They have, Quinnen Williams is great in the middle of that defense. They brought in Javon Kinlaw, who Robert Saleh knows very well, but they could use a little bit more depth at that spot. They could use another safety. They have Chuck Clark and Tony Adams are going to be their 2 safeties. They lost Ashton Davis is still available in free agency, but it doesn't appear that he's going to come back. So they kind of need that 3rd guy in the room. But other than that, it's kind of just adding, you could double up on receiver, you could double up on offensive line. You just got to make sure that you have talent at both of those spots. Yeah. But one of my favorite things from the offseason that they've done so far is they put themselves in a spot where they could go a few different directions early in this draft. Like, you can make a strong case for them to go offensive line because you don't have long-term answers with Tyron Smith and Morgan Moses, and you have some injury concern. But you could also make a case that, hey, like drafting another receiver to pair with Garrett Wilson and Mike Williams would also be really helpful. So I don't think you're necessarily pigeonholed into doing, like, in the first round, they have to do this, otherwise they get it wrong. But I think they kind of just need to build out some depth after, addressing both offensive line and wide receiver.
And Matt, so I want to ask you at that. So here we are, we're almost probably 3 weeks out, but at the 110, I want to know, what do you personally want them to take there at the 110 spot? And what do you think at this point in time that the team would take?
Okay. So honestly, in my perfect world, I'd like to trade back and get a 2nd round pick because they don't currently have a 2nd rounder due to the Rodgers trade. So if I could do that, or do I have to stay at 110?
No.
Okay. So I would move back. I would target like a Troy Fautanu on the offensive line. He's versatile. He could play tackle or guard. And then with that 2nd round pick, take a swing at wide receiver, whether it's Ricky Pearsall from Florida or Roman Wilson from Michigan, someone like that. Because I kind of want 2 swings at both the big position of need in the top 50. But honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if they are not able to trade back, that they would take a Brock Bowers. I know we talked about Conklin early on. But last year they were very high on Michael Mayer in the NFL draft. If Will McDonald wasn't on the board, that was going to be their pick, apparently, which was kind of surprising. But I think they want to really capitalize on this window with Aaron Rodgers. So I think that they'd be aggressive and try to add in an elite playmaker into the mix too.
I like bringing up Roman Wilson. I've always been pretty high on him. I think he would be a great complement to Garrett Wilson, his skill set. So, and again, being a rookie in the league with Rodgers there at quarterback and learning how to he's someone that helps you learn how to adapt to the speed of the game, right? And then also like just kind of settle in and let's just say settling into the league with Aaron Rodgers throwing you the ball and Zach Wilson throwing you the ball is a lot different. And not everyone's going to have the skill set like Garrett Wilson to make it look easy. So I think having a young complementary pass catching asset next to Wilson, having a year or two of Rodgers to kind of expedite that learning curve is, again, that's to me would be a win for the Jets, not only in the next 2 years, but whoever steps in and takes over from Rodgers from there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Then, and because it kind of, you're right. Like you're going to be looking for a quarterback in probably 2026, so you'd be putting them in a pretty good spot with Garrett Wilson, another young pass catcher, Breece Hall on the roster, which is something the Jets haven't done when they've drafted young quarterbacks. They put them in really bad spots with not very good playmakers or poor offensive lines. It's part of the reason why things didn't work out with Zach Wilson. It's why things didn't work out with Sam Darnold. So you're right. It would put them in an advantageous spot when they do go look for that future guy.
Yeah, and that's such a value add because, like you mentioned earlier, like you never know with these quarterbacks. It's such a crapshoot, and part of that is because some of these guys step in. It's a mess of an organization. It's a mess of an offense. I mean, we did it with Justin Fields and Trubisky for the Bears. I say we. I'm slowly becoming a Bears fan again, and I'm already saying we. But yeah, so like that happens, right? Is they step in and then they lose that confidence, and that is everything, period. But at quarterback position, when you lose your confidence and then just try to get that mojo back, and then you're like, wait, am I just not like? Can I? It's like quicksand, right? It's like, am I not adapting well to the professional level? And right when you lose that confidence, it's hard to get back. So, I think that is huge. Even if you don't find the guy this year in the mid rounds and he's the one that's groomed for 26, having someone, whether it's next year or the following year, that you're drafted and then it's just on a silver platter, like here is the veteran skill players that have been carrying the torch the last couple of years. Let's go.
Exactly. I'm with you on that.
Cool. So I think before I want to talk division, before we talk division, just one more thing about the Jets and where they play. I hear a lot about how bad the turf is, and that's like it's an account for a lot of injuries there. Is this a real thing? Is this a media storyline? I'm starting to hear athletes be pretty vocal about it. So like, I feel like it's more than just media kind of trash and what Meadowlands, right? Is that?
Yeah. The MetLife Stadium at the Meadowlands. It's very real. It is all too real. The injuries on the MetLife turf.
Okay.
The turf monster has gotten many Jets and Giants over the last few years. The crazy thing is they just changed the turf before the start of last season, and it arguably got worse. I don't know how that's even possible, but I mean, Rodgers went down, Jalen Phillips went down on the Dolphins this year. I'm trying to think a few years ago, but Nick Bosa went down on the turf in 2020. Like it's been a really big thing. David Bakhtiari has been vocal about it on Twitter. Some Jets have commented on it, like DJ Reed mentioned the turf this offseason, but they feel like they can't change to grass because of the number of events they have at MetLife Stadium throughout the year, like concerts and all that stuff. But I don't know. They got to do something because it's very, very real. It's an issue at that stadium.
Yeah, I mean, like, so I typically don't put a lot of attention into like media headlines. I just think a lot of it's bullshit, and there's a lot of just narratives that are kicked up. But then I hear some of the players start to get vocal. I'm like, wait, is this something that needs, like, to me, the NFL generates so much revenue. If it's a problem and these guys want grass, somehow get some fucking grass in there. Like, you know what I mean? That's got to get figured out. I would almost go to the extent of, if I was a Jet or Giants fan, creating a petition and trying to build some momentum of, like, you know, if we get X amount of signatures on this petition, you guys have to do something about it. I don't know how that even works, but it you know, if it's becoming a national headline, that's just bad.
Yeah, it's not good, honestly. And I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but it just optics wise here, following both teams, it feels like Woody Johnson, the Jets owner, is more open to the idea of putting grass in than the Giants owner, John Mara. So both, they co-own the stadium, so both owners would have to agree to it and pay for it. So it feels like, again, maybe I'm wrong, but Woody seems more open to the idea than the Mara family does. I don't know. They got to figure it out though, because it's not good.
Yeah. Well, division. Let's talk division. We spoke on it. You spoke on it a little bit earlier, but you know, obviously things are changing pretty significantly there with the Bills. To me, Josh Allen is a quarterback. He's evolved to the point where, like, you're going to put any weapons back in there and he's still going to be a contender for the division. So I don't know if you feel the same way there. Obviously the defense definitely, you know, that opening game came out and won. They're starting to probably figure him out a little bit. So, but let's talk about the division. Like, you know, you mentioned the three-headed monster. What are your thoughts? Is it realistic that we're going to be playing for the division? Just kind of give me your overall general overview of the East.
Yeah, I really do think the Jets have a chance at the division. It's not a lock, but I think you can make a strong case for any of the Bills, Dolphins, or Jets winning the division. I think it's going to be tight. I see all three of those teams somewhere between 9 and 11 wins. Like, I don't think this is a division where one team just runs away with it. I think they kind of all beat up on each other a little bit. And, you know, for the Bills, like, Allen is an unbelievable quarterback. I worry about some of the things they lost. You know, you lose your top two receivers in Diggs and Gabe Davis. Obviously, they're going to add a receiver in the draft at some point. They've lost a lot of pieces on that defense. And even when the Jets weren't really all that good the last couple of years, they always play Buffalo really tough for some reason.
Yeah.
Allen's been prone to turnovers against the Jets. They've had, I think in two of the last three games they played against Buffalo, they've turned them over like 2 or 3 times in those games. So I think that matchup for the Jets has been good. For Miami, they've really struggled against Miami's speed, but they've gotten like just some absolutely horrific quarterback play in those games recently. They were in the game on Black Friday this year until the Hail Mary at the end of the half, where they throw up the Hail Mary, gets returned for a touchdown, and then things kind of went off the rails after that. But moral of the story, I do think that the Jets have a chance at this division. I think if they get to 11 wins, whichever team in the division gets to 11 wins gets to the division. The other two, I think, will absolutely be in the mix for wild card spots in the AFC. AFC is incredibly tough, but I do think that those three teams all have a good shot to win the division and be a playoff team.
How good does it feel that the Patriots are not even talked about yet?
They tortured me the first 27 years of my life as a fan. You know, it's very, very nice that they are an afterthought. I hope that they draft a quarterback and he busts. They need a little bit more quarterback purgatory. The Mac Jones era wasn't enough for me. They need a little bit more suffering in there, but yeah, I don't think they're going to be very good this year. Maybe a 5-win team. They don't look good.
Yeah, everyone, those need to be 2 cheap wins that the Jets pick up, that all of those teams pick up if they want to. If you split with the Patriots this year, it's not going to be looking good for the division in my mind. Like, you got to go and get those 2 wins, you know? So what do you think? I don't want to make you talk about the Patriots any more than this, but like at that 3 spot, is it quarterback? Is there a potential that they draft Marvin Harrison and try to just punt to next year to get quarterback? Is it I think the third option would be maybe trying to trade back if someone gets very aggressive and they didn't get their guy at 3. What have you heard, and what do you think the route that they go?
Yeah, I feel like depending on where you look, you get different answers, but I don't know how they go into the season without drafting a quarterback in the top 3. Whoever it is, like Caleb's going to go 1, and then either Drake May or Jaden Daniels is going to go 2. So whichever one doesn't go 2, I think they take there at pick number 3. Gerard Mayo's got to establish an identity on that team, and Jacoby Brissett, love him as a spot starter. Think he's probably the best backup in the NFL, but I think you're kind of just wasting time if you're going to go into the season and punt it away and have him start, 17 games for you. But, who knows if you draft one of those 2 guys and you want Jacoby to start the year and eventually pass it off to the young quarterback, fine. I'd be good with that if I'm a Pats fan, but I don't know how they don't take a quarterback in the top 3. I think it's what they end up doing.
Yeah, those 3 separate themselves. So I agree with you. I'm more of an extremist to where I'm like championship or bust. So like if I didn't get my guy at 3, I would be totally okay with saying like, all right, we're going for the generational talent. We know Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to be an absolute superstar for the next, however many years at wide receiver. Let's draft him, start Bailey Zappi, and have him go out there and win a game or 2, and then maybe get a Quinn Ewers or a Shedeur Sanders or whoever that top guy is next year. Again, that's not realistic to ask. Like, not everyone's just going to punt an entire season. That being said, if you walk into, the next 25 season with Shedeur Sanders and Marvin Harrison Jr., I am okay with taking a season off, but that's if you don't get your guy. So, if Jaden, if they love Drake May, who probably is going to look good in a Patriots uniform. I know you don't want to hear that. But go for it. Right. You gotta start making moves there. Cause it's been pretty bad. It's been a pretty bad few years.
Yeah, it's going to be a little bit of a long build to get that back up. That roster's not in a great spot, but if you hit on the quarterback, that makes it a lot easier.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. So I kind of agree with you with the Bills too. I do think Allen's a guy who's talented enough that they're going to be in the playoffs pretty much every year, and I think they will be in the playoffs next year. I'm sure the defense is just going to, they're losing Trey White. They're losing a lot of these guys, but I believe Milano's still there. You still kind of have that core with Trey Johnson. So they'll figure it out. They'll put a defense together that's capable enough to, Josh Allen goes out and scores 38 a game. He has the ability to go out there and put everyone into a shootout position. So he's going to be in the playoffs in my mind. And then it will be someone like the Jets or Dolphins, whoever's just healthier and hotter throughout the season, that ends up taking the division, because the Bills just aren't going to have, if you draft like an AG Mitchell or bring in one of those like second tier first round guys, I don't know that you can expect them to step in and have the production of a Rome Odunze or a Malik Neighbors.
Yeah. I'm with you on that one. Like, I still think the Bills are going to be competitive and very well could make the playoffs this year. I just don't know if their roster is as good as a whole in comparison to the Jets or Dolphins. Obviously, Allen's an unbelievable talent, so if he willed them to a playoff or a division victory, I don't think that would be the craziest thing that would happen in 2024. But also, I don't know how you guys feel about it, but Miami, I still don't really trust Miami. They still seem a little bit fraudulent. Like, they haven't really beaten any good teams. To their credit, they took advantage of their easier schedule. They won all the games they were supposed to, but I don't trust that team in cold weather. I don't trust them in a big spot with Tua against a good quarterback. So I don't know how much I'm buying into Miami this year.
Yeah, they're so hot and cold. I'm not really sold on Tua in general, and I have an LSU. I'm wearing LSU, so like you may think it's biased, but like you said, I mean, Tua is almost like Michael Penix was in college. I don't know how much college ball you're watching, but like when everything's going good and he can stand in the pocket and be comfortable, yeah, sure. The Dolphins put up these ridiculous numbers. And then in my mind, there's a little bit of public inflation going on. They're like, oh my gosh, this offense is incredible. They put up 70 points. But then you bring in, you're playing a playoff team and he gets a little uncomfortable and things start getting sloppy. Throws aren't as precise. And yeah, I agree. I think the defense is going to take a little bit of a hit down there as well this year. If gun to my head today, Jets, Bills, Dolphins probably missed the playoffs because the AFC is incredibly talented. You have Bengals, you have Ravens, you have Steelers, and who am I missing there?
Chiefs.
Yeah, Chiefs. Those guys are automatic, right? Not necessarily the Steelers, but I think Bengals bounce back big. You have Ravens and you have Chiefs. Like between the North and the East, there's going to be 2, maybe 3 teams coming out of there in the playoffs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm with you. It's tough. The AFC is a gauntlet, man. Like comparison, you look at the AFC versus the NFC. We didn't even talk about the Texans in the South. Like they're going to be really good too. Stroud's going to get better this year, so the path is going to be really, really difficult. But again, if the Jets end their 14-year playoff drought, if they win a couple playoff games, I know Jet fans are going to be really, really excited about that. And with the hopes of, again, with Rodgers coming back for one last run in 25 and maybe get over the hump and win that Super Bowl. But I think they are positioning themselves to where, it all starts in the division in the AFC East. I think they have a legitimate shot to win the AFC East. And then whatever happens after that, you see once you get into the tournament.
Mm-hmm.
I love it. Well, I think this has been outstanding. Shane, do you have any other questions?
Well, I think we could not do one of our off-season shows if we did not ask Matt about the local food establishments in his area. We would be doing an injustice to our co-host who's not on the show today, Truck, who's a trucker and is out driving in different parts of America. So Matt, we want to know, if we're up in your neck of the woods, what are the go-to spots we need to hit?
Okay. So it depends on what you're looking for, but if you're going to go like stereotypical, like New York, you got to come get pizza. There's a ton of different spots that you can go and get a really good slice. My favorite is probably, there's a spot, Anthony's, which is very generic, but that's a good one. Or Gino's in Rockville Center is good for pizza. I also am a big like wings kind of guy, like football games. If I'm going out and want like more bar food, the local at in Babylon's a really good spot for that out on Long Island. And then bagels obviously is another Long Island staple. Got to go to shout out A&S Bagel. They got the best bagel there. So you can't come to Long Island and not get a bacon, egg, and cheese, a slice of pizza, and then maybe you stop at a favorite bar on the way. So those are all my go-tos for the more generic, stereotypical what do you want to get food wise in New York or Long Island.
I love it. I think I was in New York City. I think I had like John's Bleecker.
That's phenomenal. That is, I would say, top 3 in New York. So
yeah,
you pick very, very well.
Yeah, that's where I ended up going. That was my first New York City slice, and it was pretty incredible. But hey, I think we learned a lot. I think our listeners are going to love kind of getting that blueprint for what we want to see out of the rest of the off season, and then what to be excited about for next year. So I had a lot of I had a lot of fun talking to you. I think you're extremely knowledgeable, a great voice of the Jets. So I just, I appreciate you coming on for sure. We'd love to check in at some point during the year when you guys are playing in Buffalo for the division or whatever it may be. So if you're if you're willing to come back on and kind of touch base at some point during the season, we would love that.
Absolutely, guys. It was a blast. Thank you so much for having me, and I'd love to hop back on with you at some point.
All right. Well, thank you, Matt. Everyone, make sure to follow him at Matt O'Leary NY. Thank you to everyone for watching the video. Please hit and like the video and subscribe to the channel. Let us know in the comments what you think the Jets should be doing in the draft coming up. Follow us on all of our social platforms at Fantasy Roadshow. Other than that, everybody, you know what to do. Buckle up.